We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
In the wake of the Uvalde, Texas shooting, politicians are going full throttle to increase control over firearms. But is this perhaps focusing on the wrong aspect? And why has talk of armed teachers and school security measures been entirely ignored? Well, someone who's looked at the numbers on this is Liberty Nation's Jeff Charles, who joins us today. Welcome back, Jeff. Good to have you here.
Yeah, glad to be back.
So, Jeff, give me the broad strokes version. What actually works in terms of school security?
Well, we can look at a variety of different situations and different types of government buildings. I mean, you have schools in the inner cities, you have courthouses, you have city council buildings, other types of government buildings. And when was the last time that you heard about a mass shooting in any of these areas? It doesn't happen very often.
No.
Yeah, even if somebody does get a little crazy, they're taken care of pretty quick because they have these security measures to protect the people inside. So we're talking things like metal detectors, armed security that's already on campus, not waiting to respond after something happens. Not just one officer, you have maybe 3 to 5 armed agents there to prevent the shooting or to minimize the damage from that. You might have surveillance cameras, and people have talked about points of entry. I don't know much about that part, but there are a lot of different security measures that we could be employing that would help to even stop these in the first place, or minimize the damage just in case somebody does try to victimize children.
Well, I think what everybody really wants to know, Jeff, is how do we know for sure that these things would actually work?
Yeah, it's like I said before. When was the last time you saw somebody go into a courthouse and take out 5, 6, 7 people? Or members of your city council? People hate politicians, right? So have you heard about anybody going in there with a gun and,
now, people have been in there with their harsh words and then had the DOJ set on them, of course, by Attorney General Merrick Garland, but slightly different situation. So why do you think the politicos here, they're not really willing to engage with these ideas specifically? Now, is it because these ideas, metal detectors, armed security, points of entry and exit, is it because they don't specifically deal with guns and therefore they don't get the headlines that other such legislation or regulation would?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot to it. I mean, I think when we're talking about the politicos and even everyday people, about 70% of these people pushing gun control don't know much about guns or about the issue itself. I think that a lot of people don't like the idea of our schools having armed security because it looks like it's a prison or militarized, although we don't make those same complaints with courthouses and other buildings. When it comes to the politicos, yes, I think that is precisely the reason why they're pushing back against security measures, because their ultimate goal is to have fewer Americans who are armed, even if that doesn't really fix the problem or even save any lives.
Yeah, you and I have spoken about this next topic before, Jeff, at length in some cases. And it seems that homeschooling is obviously on a massive rise in the US and worldwide at the moment. Now, do you think that some of those parents who are concerned about school shooters might be gravitating more towards the idea of educating their kids at home in a safe environment? Now, is that a sound theory?
I'm already hearing about it. I'm already seeing people talking about homeschooling. Now, a lot of these people were probably thinking about homeschooling in the first place, but this type of event can push somebody over the edge, especially when these things become so politicized that no solutions are implemented. So parents are seeing this. They see that this has been happening for 2 decades and not much has been done to stop these shootings. If you're already thinking about homeschooling, this is the type of thing that would actually push you to do it.
Yeah, it's very much a catalyst, I think. Do you think that part of it is because they've seen laws enacted after previous school shootings and they failed to actually stop school shootings taking place? And in many cases, which I'll be talking about with Scott Cosenza later on in this show, where the laws that were implemented as a knee-jerk reaction, they didn't really address the specific crimes that were committed, which led to the school shooting. So do you think part of it is because the parents, they're aware that any laws that are being enacted here are knee-jerk reactions rather than solid solutions to protecting children?
I think so, Mark. I think the bottom line is, a lot of parents aren't even paying attention to the legislation and things like that. Some are, some aren't. But the bottom line, all parents know is that this stuff keeps happening. And that's all they need to know. The problem hasn't been solved. We haven't decreased the number of school shootings. We don't even have a plan for mental health or anything else. All the issues that we talk about that lead up to these shootings, it's just talk, and everybody knows it. So people are probably even expecting for it to happen again, unfortunately, because we always have a conversation, but they're always the wrong conversations that don't lead to any solutions. And that's all anybody needs to know. If it keeps happening, that's all they need to know.
So what are the right conversations, Jeff?
I would say it goes back to what I was saying before. Why shouldn't our children enjoy the same protection that our politicians do, that our judges, that our officials? Why should they not have the same level of protection? I could take people on the gun control side a little bit more seriously if they were willing to consider those options while still pushing for their anti-gun stuff that I would disagree with, but they don't. They push back against things that have already been proven to work because their agenda is something different than safeguarding these kids' lives.
Yeah, and of course, many of the politicians calling for a reduction in firearm ownership are protected by armed employees almost 24 hours a day in some cases, in many cases. Now, with most things political, it does tend to come down to a cost-benefit ratio. Now, is there, I presume there is, but there's some benefit to politicians aiming for measures that they know won't pass in Congress. As we've seen at the moment, there's obviously a very 50-50 divide pretty much on what kind of gun control implementations or whether to implement any gun control measures at all. But they kind of know that these things, that they're not going to pass with 60 votes. They're not going to break the filibuster on this. But do they see it as at least they will have been able to explain to the public that, look, we tried to do this and it's their fault that we failed to do this. Therefore, the answer is more of us and less of them. Is that really the angle they're taking on this?
I think both sides are doing that, Mark. I think Democrats in particular, Schumer already said he's going to be holding the vote. Yeah, Senator John Cornyn is going to be meeting with Chris Murphy, the Republican and Democrat, to find out a solution to gun violence. And they're not going to come to any agreement. So what Chuck Schumer is going to do is he's going to get people on record voting against whatever the Democrats come up with, hoping that the American public will view Republicans less favorably. Republicans are going to say, hey, we tried to work with them, but what they wanted was way too radical and not practical. So it's going to be interesting to see who wins that messaging battle. Right now, polling shows that most of the country wants stricter gun laws, but that margin is very small, and it's been closing rapidly over the past 4 years. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and just to come back on that, Jeff, I think when we see the polls that say most people favor certain gun laws, it's certainly not what the Democrats are proposing at the moment. That would, I think, be far and away too much for the majority of the nation in terms of what they're asking for. Well, Jeff Charles, we will absolutely come back and revisit this at some point. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Now, don't go anywhere. Coming up after this short break, we're back with Scott DeCasenza discussing the laws that were put in place after shootings and if they worked or not. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.